Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we're gonna see a compilation of gambits in chess. And I don't know how many we're gonna have by the end of this video, but let's just get right into it. This is going to be the Vienna Gambit, an e4 opening. So once they strike with e5, now we can develop the knight to c3. It's important to protect the pawn. Now, let's say they develop the knight to f6. Okay, we have some kind of symmetry here. Now, the Vienna Gambit starts with f4. That is the gambit, right? We push the pawn to f4, allowing them to take. Okay, once they take, they can also ignore it. It doesn't have to be this response. But this is the Vienna Gambit accepted. From here, we have different ideas. We have to keep in mind knight f3, because we are weakening the diagonal, right? The minute we push this pawn, we are weakening this diagonal. Okay, so knight f3 is an idea, but before we can push e5 to kick out the knight. So they have to move the knight, have to go back. Now we develop the knight just to protect these two squares, this diagonal, and we're preventing this move. All right, so let's say this is one of the best moves, d6. And here we have different options. For example, we can grab more space in the center, d4. d4, let's say we have these straight up pawns, and now we can put the queen on this pin, right? Putting pressure on the king. And then we have to develop the bishop. Then we can win the pawn, and we can keep developing our pieces. For example, knight to f5. Sorry, bishop to f5, not knight. And then once they kick out the bishop, we can take. We can even take here. And now we win back the other pawn. Okay, so this is kind of simple. There are many variations of this. For example, okay, so we can have different variations for this opening. Let's say we reach this point where we're going to offer the pawn, but they don't take. They're gonna play knight c6, developing the other knight. Okay, now we can take the pawn on e5. If they take back with the knight, we can grab more space in the center with these two pawns, d4 and e4. Knight to c6, they have to go back, and they're getting into trouble. We can push e5, and now we're covering all of these squares. None of them are available for the knight, so they have to come back and retreat the knight. So this is a really sad position, and we just keep developing our pieces. Also important, again, knight f3, so they don't have this move anymore, or these two squares for the queen. And everything is good. Everything is good for this opening.
So just stay tuned for the rest of the show. So have you ever felt betrayed? Switches how you see things. Realize something needs change. Cause I know you got me up. Let me show you what's up. Cause enough is enough.
Alright, one of the funniest gambits to play is gonna be the Stafford Gambit, where we're gonna try to trick white. So the game starts with d4, then we can go with e5, knight f3, and a common way to defend is knight c6. In this one, we're gonna do something different. Knight f6, not knight f5. So knight f6, on defense the pawn, we're offering the pawn. So first we offer this pawn. They're gonna take, and here we can take, but that is gonna enter Petrov's defense territory. And then we can get into a little bit of theory where they can put the queen here, and then we put the queen here, and it gets messy. So don't take the pawn. Instead, we're gonna develop the other knight, knight c6. So here they can take. We allow this trade to happen. It's perfectly fine. Once we take away from the center, so as to open these two files, then let's say they play something like d3. Okay, they want to develop the bishop, it makes sense. And now, very important move, bishop c5. Bishop c5, the point is to attack this pawn, the f pawn, which has become weak. Okay, and then this will be a blunder. This is just right out a blunder. Now, knight to g5. So, sorry, bishop to g5. Confusing the pieces. Because here we can sacrifice two pieces. We're doing something very sneaky. We're gonna sack the knight. It's like, wait, are we sacking the knight and we're sacking the queen? This is just losing the queen. Yes, but now we can target this pawn, the f pawn, give it a check, and the king doesn't have a lot of squares to travel, right? The knight is covering this square, so only move in the position is going to be king e2, and now we can go checkmate, bishop g4, game over. Okay, so this is one of the variations of the gambit, and it's really sneaky. Let me show you other variation. Okay, let's rewind just to see another interesting variation. e4, we're gonna play e5, they will play knight f3, knight f6, they take our pawn, now we offer the knight, they take our knight, okay, here. And then they don't play this move, d3. They don't have to play it, right? One of the interesting continuations is going to be e5. We don't have to go back. Now we're gonna do the same thing as before. We're gonna push the pawn, the knight on e4, and then they might wanna play d3. Okay, this continuation leads to a trap where we can put the bishop on c5. See how the ideas are very similar. The knight still belongs here. The bishop still belongs here. So if they take the knight, now we can go with this very good tactic, which is, okay, we're gonna sack the bishop. Once they take the bishop, we win the queen. Okay, let's move on to the King's Gambit. In this one, we're going to gambit the pawn next to the king, right? That's why it's called the King's Gambit. So e4, e5, and we push f4. Okay, so that's the King's Gambit. And here there's a lot of theory. This is only the introduction, as for many other variations of this video. But okay, we can develop the knight. We actually have to play this move, knight f3. We don't want to get into trouble, just like the previous gambit. You don't want to weaken this diagonal, or at least protect it, right? It's already being weakened. So, but it provokes this move. One of the best moves in the position is g5. Oh no, my knight is getting kicked out. So we can push h4, and if they go with this, g4, okay, we jump in, attacking this pawn. Okay, and then h6. Also a very sensible move, smart. We can sack the knight. They have to take with the king, right? Because we are forking these two pieces. Now we can take this pawn that was hanging on g4 with the queen. They activate the knight. We can take the other pawn. Everything is fine. Bishop to d6. We just retreat the queen. Knight to c6, and the game continues. But yeah, we have weakened the structure or the defenses around the king, and it gets really spicy. Okay, I want to show you this other line where black, instead of pushing the pawn to g5, another strategy would be to challenge and undermine our pawn on e4 by playing d5. Okay, here we can take, and let's say they develop the knight to f6, so they don't even have to rush it, right? They have two possibilities. But here we have this pressing move, a forcing move, bishop to b5 check. And they cannot defend with the knight. That will be just losing the hand, hanging the knight, or losing the knight. I guess they can also develop the bishop here, it's fine. And other variation will be to defend with the pawn. Okay, here we just take, they develop the knight, and now we push d4. Maybe even the idea of pushing d5, right? So bishop to d6, castle, castle, knight to b2, bishop to g4, and then we have these three pawn pawn formation that is a counterbalance for this diagonal, correct? Now rook to e8, bishop to d3. This is where usually this bishop belongs, and we have a very good combination with these three pawns, and the game continues. Personally, one of my favorite, the Evans Gambit. So we start with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4, bishop c5. Everything looks normal. But then we strike with b4. Right, we're just giving up the pawn. Yeah, okay. The best move in the position is actually to ignore it, and they can just, the game continues. But okay, if they take here, it's completely fine too. Now we can play c3, and then start with this pawn push d4. d4 they take, and we have control over the center, right? We have a lot of control, and this is actually slightly better for white. All right, so we just saw this variation where the bishop goes back. But what if they put the bishop on a5, which is also a reasonable move? Then we can strike with d4 anyway. Once they take, we castle. Okay, we get the king to safety. We can gambit a second pawn, and then put the queen on b3. Now we're threatening to take here on f7. They will have to defend. So only defensive move in the position is going to be queen e7. Now we're developing the other knight, and we're going to hit the queen here. They're gonna have to take. They're gonna have to take. So once they take, everything is very loose in this position. Now the knight is hanging. Okay, they will have to retreat, and we can put the bishop on a3. They can never castle, and the queen is getting into trouble. They're gonna have to get out of this diagonal, and it's very, very difficult to play. This bishop is loose too, so we can even think about, I'm not sure, but we can think about queen b5. So yeah, this is very good position for white, as you have the long diagonals for the bishop. And if you can get rid of this bishop as well, then you can also think about giving a check here with the rook. Everything is winning in this position. Now we enter the territory of the Scotch Gambit, where we're gonna push e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we strike with d4. That is the Gambit, that is the Scotch Gambit. So we're giving up the pawn in exchange for quick development. Now we can develop the bishop to c4. Let's say we get knight f6, and we can even push e5, right? They're gonna have to retreat the knight, or they can also choose to go with this counter move, which is d5. And we can have different options. We can take here. We can also play en passant. So that would be, I think that's the best move in the position. We can play en passant, and they can just take back with the queen, take back with the pawn or the bishop. Everything is good here. We can also accept this pawn and actually just take the knight. They will take our bishop, then we can castle. Everything is fine. So there is other variation here where instead of playing knight f6, they can also develop the bishop to c5. Okay, so now we can push c3. We're giving up a second pawn. Once they take, we can sack the bishop. So we can sack the bishop because this comes with tempo. So once they take back, we can put the queen on d5, forking the king and the bishop. And yeah, we're gonna win the piece. This is winning now for white. Alright, now let's see the Goring Gambit, which is a sub-variation or a sub-line of the Scotch Gambit. So the game starts the same with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, right? That's the Gambit. Now, once the pawn takes, we can push c3, just like we did in one variation before in the Scotch Gambit, but we do the move order changes. So in this case, we go with c3 first. Once they take our pawn, we can develop the knight, bishop to b4, for example, knight to c4, and knight f6, e5. We can push e5, and now they're gonna have to move the knight somewhere, right? For example, one variation is going to be moving the knight to g4, so we can sack the bishop. Just like before, we sack the bishop, and once the king takes, we can jump in with the knight. Our knight is protected. Okay, so this cannot happen. Once the king moves, we can take the knight back with the queen. So that is one variation. What happens if they play, let's go here, knight to f6, and now they don't really, okay, sorry, we push e5, and they don't really go to g4. Instead they go to e4, okay, threatening to win the knight. Now we can play queen d5, just like an idea from before. Queen d5, where the bishop was here, now we're threatening to take this pawn. So queen to e7, defending the pawn. Now we can take the knight. That was very loose. Now d6, okay, offering the pawn. We can castle. D takes on e5, bishop to g5, targeting the queen, and everything is good. The Danish Gambit. I also have a video where I learned this gambit in 12 minutes, something like that. Check that out. So after e5, d4, it takes on d4, and then we're gonna give a second pawn, right? So we gave up this pawn, and now we give up this pawn as well. So if they take here, now we can develop the knight, and let's say knight c6, bishop to c4, knight to f6, knight f3. We are one piece ahead of development. So this is the Danish Gambit. To gain development, e5, they have to move the knight. Bishop takes on f7, for example, king takes, and now we're forking the two pieces, right? We're forking the king and the queen, and the king, not the queen. Okay, there is other variations that I like a little bit better, because pawns are not going to matter that much, but we're going to go for piece activity. So first we gambited the pawn, right? And now we're going to gambit a second pawn. So we can always, okay, once they take, we can always take back with the knight. Instead, we're going to ignore it and develop the bishop. So black will take here, not always, but they can take. And now we have developed the other bishop. We have the long diagonals, the two diagonals for the bishop. Later we can also put the queen on b3. And these are gonna be very fun lines to play. So bishop to b4, we still have to defend. We want to trade knights. You don't want to trade the bishop. So also you're developing, right? Then this pawn is kind of hanging. You ignore it, you don't care about it. So queen b3, bishop takes on c3. And yeah, this is a winning position just because you have a lot of activity. Castle, e5, knight to e4, for example. We have to move the queen, d5, bishop takes on d5, knight moves, knight to a2, and the game goes on, right? But we gambited the 3 pawns in this position, and yet the computer says this is equal, no problem. Okay, the Can Gambit, which is a response to e4, e5, and now bishop to c4, the bishop's opening. Now we can strike with d5, that is the Can Gambit. We're giving up the pawn. And what happens if they take here? We have different ideas. Top engine move is going to be c6. I have seen this move being played before, f5. Don't play f5, you just weaken the diagonal for no reason. Instead, you can give c6. Once they take, you have developed your knight. And d3, knight f6, you focus on development, knight to c3, bishop f5, bishop to g5, bishop to b4, pinning the knight, knight f3, castle, and you are fine. We just have a game. And the other version of this, what if they take with the bishop? Okay, you're even happier, you're much better, because now you can develop the knight. They will have to retreat the bishop, and then we can just take the pawn, the hanging pawn. Yeah, if they do anything else, it's gonna be very weird. For example, here, or we can just take the bishop, it's fine, and then we just recover the pawn anyway. Now, we want to see the Lewis Gambit. So, This is a little bit similar to the Can Gambit, but with white. This is an opening for white, e4, e4, e5, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, and now we strike with d4. Okay, and now they have to make a decision here. The best move in the position is to take with the bishop. And now we can just develop the knight. Knight c6, we can take the bishop. He takes on d4, cancel, and the game continues. Okay, but what happens if they take with the pawn? That would actually lead to a blunder. Here, as you can see in the arrow, we can sack the bishop. And king takes. We have the geometry of the board. So we're giving a check, forking the two pieces. Once this pawn is moved, we can take the bishop. They develop the knight to f6, knight to d2. And now we can also trade, but okay, let's just take the pawn. And yeah, we have a slight advantage with white.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
We get now the Louis counter gambit. So it's gonna be very similar to the Can Gambit, but with a twitch. So e4, e5, bishop to c4, bishop to c5. And then here, the idea is to strike in the center, right? If we were playing the Louis Gambit, they would play d4. But instead they play c3, maybe preparing for d4. Okay, and now we can do the same thing to them, d5. Okay, in this case, they would have to make a decision. They have to decide whether to take with the pawn or with the bishop. Best move is to take with the bishop, and we just have a regular game where we develop the knight. They can push now d4, this idea. Okay, we take with the pawn, c takes on d4. We give this force in check, have to defend. We trade bishops, we trade the other bishop, and everything is fine. What happens if they take with the pawn? Let's go back here. Okay, if they take with the pawn, guess the move. Probably you have guessed it because you have seen this pattern by now. So bishop takes on f2. Right, once the king takes, we can give a check, and now we're winning the bishop. Okay, we're winning the bishop, knight to f3, and the game continues, knight f6, d3, the queen takes the pawn, and yeah, it's all good.
And when I get to choose what I do, I'm like a weapon. I'm not sharp as many, but got hard. I'm ready to change scars to envy, to win large and plenty. I like to play fast, never change back. Calling out, I'll pay back, cause I'm great at that. Oh.
Okay, the Boden Kieseritky Gambit. Really hard to pronounce. So we start the game with d4. Okay, so here, e4, e5, bishop to c4. Okay, the bishop's opening. And now knight f6. So here we can protect the pawn. Or we can also play d3. That's completely fine. But instead we choose to give up the pawn so they can take. Okay, once they take, we can also do the same thing to black. But instead we're choosing to blunder to gambit the pawn and play knight c3. So we have something in mind here. After d takes on c3, this is going to become a weakness. So for example, I'm gonna move on here. If they play d6, that will be a questionable move because now we can jump in with the knight and attack the f pawn, right? As we have done before in other gambits. If they try to protect with the bishop, we just take with the bishop, it's fine. And now we're targeting the f pawn, and at the same time, as you saw it, the b pawn, which is not protected, sorry. Alright, there's different versions of this. In this case, we have the scenario where they play e4. Okay, we have exactly the same idea. We jump in with the knight to g5, targeting the pawn. So if they play d5, we can even sack the knight. It's much like the Fry Liber attack. We sack the knight. If king takes, we can take with tempo. And now the queen is hanging, right? So we can just give a check here. King takes, and the queen is gone. Okay, well, let's just see another example when they... Alright, so what happens if they develop the knight, which seems like a very solid move, just keeping an eye on the pawn. Well, we have the same ideas. We jump in with the knight to g5, So if they strike with d5, we take with the bishop. So they have to defend. This is a common sensible move, bishop to e6. This time around, we get rid of the bishop with our knight. Once they take here, we're gonna have two tempos. First, we have a check with the queen. Once they move, we have this other tempo, another check, getting rid of the knight. Once they take, we take on e5, looking at the rook. Rook has to move, and now we take this again with another tempo. So this is kind of the only defense they have, or the smartest defense. We can take the queen, bishop takes, and now we can castle, right? We have a slightly better pawn structure, 3, in this case 3 versus 2, and in this case it's gonna be 4 versus 3. And it's completely playable for both sides, but yeah, black is in a disadvantage, or 3 points of disadvantage actually. Alright, now we have the Calabrese counter Gambit. I don't think the name is Calabrian, but that's how I found it. Okay, so the game starts with e4, e5, bishop to c4, and then this Gambit is pushing f5. If they take the pawn, here we're happy, we can push d5. The idea is to kick out the bishop and then grab more space with this move a5. I don't necessarily love this Gambit because they have this move queen h5 at any point. So here they can play queen h5, and now we have to move the king, and it's really awkward, right? But okay, let's say they play something like this. Now we can push a5, a3, bishop to c5, d3, knight to c6, and we are ahead in development, even playing with black. So also just be careful and play knight f6 as soon as possible, so you don't really weaken this diagonal. The next one we have the Lopez Gambit. I'm not gonna lie, I tried to do some research on this one. I couldn't find anything. The Lopez Gambit doesn't make any sense because we're not playing the Rui Lopez. But okay, I'm gonna show it to you anyway. We start with e4, e5, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, queen e2. Okay, that's slightly different. Knight to f6, d3, knight to c6, c3. Everything looks like a little bit like the Rui Lopez, but the knight will be here, right? And the bishop will be on b5. That's why it doesn't make sense. And knight to e7. This move doesn't make any sense to me. Normally, I guess you would just play something like d6, even d5 is good. Why? I don't know. I don't understand this move. And the Gambit is f4. Okay, we're just giving up the pawn, and if they take, we still play normal moves, but first we push e5, and then these are top engine. Knight f goes to d5, d4, bishop b6, knight to h3, c5. We can win the pawn. Take, we take. Okay, the game continues. But the top, so they don't have to take here. According to the computer, they can push d5, right? And then we enter crazy lines because here is saying, okay, we don't have to move the bishop. We can take here, and top engine. This is top engine move. They can take. If we take back, they just take our bishop. That's not good. What we have to do is move the bishop and give a check. Okay, and now they will defend with the bishop, with the pawn, sorry. Now we can take, and if they take the bishop, that will be a mistake. We have tactics here. So if they try to defend, the bishop is hanging. Okay, so they cannot really take just like that. Okay, I was checking real quick. So if we take, here, if we take, they actually have to take the knight, and now the bishop is hanging, and we also want to take this bishop. So the game continues, right? So maybe we can take here, and then the bishop is hanging. So the game goes on. Okay, we go with the McDonnell double gambit. We're going to gambit 2 pawns. We start with e4, e5, bishop to c4, and if we get bishop to c5, we're gonna push the magic pawn b4. Okay, they can take. That's a good move. And now we're going to gambit the second pawn f4, which is completely winning for black with perfect play. But we're gonna go for tricks here. So if they take, now we can play this nasty move c3. Okay, and if they go back, now we can push queen to h5, right? So as you can see, this is the top engine move. But if they do something else, if they try to defend here, oh, okay, the bishop is hanging. Thank you for that. So they cannot do that. They actually have to play d5. d5 is the only defensive move we can take with the bishop. And now they have to defend. They have to keep defending, keep an eye on this pawn. Now we can give a check. Queen e7. Now this pawn here is hanging. Oh, wait for a second. The pawn here is hanging. If we try to defend, we can even give a check here to the queen, to the king. And if the queen takes, the rook is hanging. So it gets crazy, as you can see. It gets really, really crazy. It looks very fun to play. So here, yeah, you're gonna gambit the 2 pawns, the b pawn and the f4 pawn. The Ponziani Gambit, one of the strongest openings you can go for. It's very difficult to play against, and you can get really fun lines. So the game starts with e4, e5, bishop to c4, and if they play knight f6, you start with d4. Anytime you can push d4, you probably have a very good solid opening. Now there is a really funny line. For example, if they take here, and then this is not the best move, but probably you can play queen h5, right? Trying to trick black. If they go back attacking the queen, this is checkmate. So it was very, very, very quick. And what they actually have to do is they can take here, top engine move. You can either take with the queen or with the knight. It's better to develop the knight, not take with the knight, but to develop the knight. And the game continues, so they can give a check with the bishop. Here you try bishops, develop the other knight, and the game continues. Then, what happens if you take back with the queen? Right, so here they took, you take back with the queen, here. Then they can give a check with the bishop. It's gonna be the same top move. You can defend with the pawn now, and they can either retreat the bishop here, it's fine, or develop the knight. That's preferable for black. They can develop the knight. Okay, you just move the queen away. This will be a mistake, by the way. So not a mistake, but inaccuracy. You can just move your queen and hit the knight if they do that. So that's not convenient. After queen e3, then they can just play bishop a5. For example, retreating the bishop, and the game continues, not a problem. You can also start thinking about this move e5. So yeah, very good, solid opening.
I'm going crazy, don't think I'll get on safe. So I'm taking 6 shots all straight to the face. I'm taking.
Alright, this is the Traxler counter gambit. Very useful when we're playing against the front liber attack. So we play e5, knight, bishop to c4. And they have this idea of, okay, we're gonna develop the knight, knight f6, knight f3, and the point is to jump in with the knight and target the f pawn. Perfect, knight to c6, knight to g5, and we have different ways to deal with this attack. Top engine move might be d5. Okay, so after they take with the pawn, we can get here, and then the game continues. But there is this counter gambit, which is completely ignoring the attack on the pawn and just developing the bishop. We're gonna develop the bishop to c5, and after the knight takes, this looks daunting, right? They're attacking the rook and the queen. We don't care, we sacrifice the bishop. So we always have this tactic where, okay, once the king takes back, we can jump in with the knight, and now the king has to move. So we can get the queen out, get it out of danger. We're also threatening to play this. So the knight is just common sensible move. The knight taking the rook. Okay, perfect. We can give a check, and we have a forcing mate. So the king moves to e2, queen to f2, forcing mate again, so forcing move again. Knight to b4, check, giving up the knight, but now this is a checkmate. In this case, this is black to play. We play queen to h4, and a natural move is to take this rook. But let's say they know this variation where they get checkmated. They might want to kick out the queen. Okay, g3. So in this case, we take the pawn with the knight, which is like, wait, whatever. So are we hanging also the knight and the rook? Then after they take, look at this bishop. The bishop is hanging. Okay, we can give a check. The bishop is still hanging. And now, but wait, we can castle now. We can castle, and this knight cannot be moved because he's pinned to the king. So we have tricked them. And now a sensible move is to kick out the queen. Perfect. We can give a check. We can even give a check here with the pawn, which is so crazy. And now once the king moves, we can take the bishop, right? And this knight is still hanging. Okay, the Latvian Gambit. The game starts with e4, e5, knight f3, and then we gambit the pawn by playing f5. So here, not only offering this pawn, but actually e5, right? They can take on e5. Now we can put the queen on f6, d4, d6, and they will have to move the knight. So knight to c4, we take this pawn on e4, knight to c3, and we can put the queen on g6, keeping an eye on this pawn as well as this. And we later have to think about developing the bishop, the knight to f6, and everything is good. Now you might be wondering, okay, what happens if they take the pawn here, right? Okay, we can push e4, kicking out the knight. So if they put the knight here, which is the idea is to create some threats on this diagonal. Okay, so we want to avoid that by playing knight f6. And we have nothing to worry about now in this diagonal. Bishop to e2, bishop to e7, and now we can even castle. We can also play d6, try to recover the pawn, and also everything is good. Next on the list we have the Schliemann Gambit. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It sounds like German. So e4 and then e5, knight f3, very similar to the Latvian Gambit, knight to c6, bishop to b5, and now we strike with f5. So once they take the pawn, we can go with e4, right? Now they wanna retreat the knight. Here we have to be careful. We cannot just grab more space and play d5. Because they have this is the geometry of the board. They have this check, and now we're getting into a lot of trouble here, right? With the king. What we have to do is after d5, instead of d5, we can play queen g5. Okay, we're threatening to take the pawn, so they will have to protect, keep an eye on the pawn. Okay, so now we continue development, knight f6, and let's say they play something like d3. We cannot take, queen is hanging, but we can take the pawn. Okay, they take, and we just take here, and everything is fine. Let's say the game continues. Let's say they take here, we can develop the bishop, and we're aiming for this pawn. So yeah, the game goes on, and it gets a little bit crazy, but in this position we have an advantage. Okay, the Goring Gambit against the Sicilian defense. So we start with d4 and c5. They play the Sicilian. What you're gonna do is give up the pawn right away. b4. And most people are going to take. So what you can do now is grab more space in the center, top engine move, d4, and now black is no longer fighting for the center. Okay, and the game continues, but there is something much better you can do, which is even more sneaky and even a little bit more risky, but it's fine. You can give up a second pawn. And as you can see, the computer is saying, oh, no, you have to play d5. But if they take here, you are happy. You can also, don't even have to rush. You can, again, play d4 and the game continues, right? But you can take here. So, okay, you can even take back with the bishop. And I have played this before, so I know the response. A lot of people are going to play e5. Okay, you just trade bishops. You're happy. Now they cannot castle. And now you can start developing your other pieces. These are the best moves. You can play d4. They take. You take back with the queen. They develop the knight. You remove the queen. And you start concentrating on developing other pieces. Everything is good. This one is also kind of flexible. You don't have to have this kind of system. So if you like these flexible openings, this is an amazing choice. Nothing is gonna be a huge blunder. Just look out for maybe this diagonal. But here, as you can see, they don't even have a bishop. So everything is good. Yeah, everything is good for white. Another response against the Sicilian defense is the Smith-Morra Gambit. So the game starts with d4, we get c5, and we have different responses here, but we want to play d4 right away. Once they take, we can play c3. This isn't the top engine move, but it's the traditional line of the Smith-Morra Gambit. So the top engine move, according to this engine anyway, is to play knight f3. But later it's gonna give us, so just let me show you here. After e5, which by the way, don't think about taking this pawn. That will be hanging the knight, so don't do that. Instead, we can develop the bishop to c4. They develop the knight to c6, and now we offer c3. So this is what I don't understand about computers. That is gonna give me the top engine move 3 moves down the line. Okay, but it's fine. So we're supposed to play c3, offering a second pawn. If they take, we develop the knight. They develop the knight, knight f3, d6, bishop to c4, a6, bishop to f4. We have completed development. 4 pieces are out, and they have only 1 piece out. So we are slightly better, and it's much easier to play just because we have this lead in development. e6, castle, and yeah, we just start playing chess from here. Alright, this isn't going to be a gambit, but I still want to show you what if you don't want to play against a traditional Sicilian system. So the option is to play c3. Super solid move. It's much like the Smith-Morra Gambit, but you don't really wait for d4, right? You just play c3 right away, which is with the idea of playing d4 later. So let's say they play d5, you can take the pawn. Then you play d4, knight to f6, knight to f3. You develop your pieces, bishop to e3, bishop to g4, keeping an eye on this pin. Then e6, d takes on c5. You can trade queens here, and everything is good. Avoiding a lot of theory, you can play c3 right away. Alright, next the Halloween Gambit. Probably you're playing this in November, so that would be great. Very thematic. The game starts with d4, now e5, knight to f3, knight to f6, knight to c3, knight to c6. All the knights are out. And now the Halloween Gambit is just to sacrifice the knight. Okay, you're gonna give up the knight and they will take back. Okay, common move. Then you strike with d4. I love this move. In many variations, in many openings, the Scotch Gambit, we can see that later. d4 is always a common idea, right, in these gambits. So the knight has to move back. And now we can push e5, knight to g8. And we have completed our goal, which is grabbing all the space we can in the center with our pawns. Bishop to c4. And it's gonna get ugly for black. They have no development, so this is the advantage of the Halloween Gambit. Okay, let's see this other variation where, okay, we strike with d4, and a common move is to go here. But what if they want to move the knight to back to c6? Okay, we push d5, and now they have to move the knight again, right? We strike with f4. And they have to move it again. They have to find the square. So it's like a bit of a chase, where it's a chase of geese or goose. And then e5, knight to g8. Like, yeah, these knights are not going anywhere. It's like, it's very funny. And now d6, she takes on d6. We take here, and now all the pieces are trapped. Like, they have no moves. This is very sad opening for black. Now queen b6, for example. Knight to b5. We're threatening to fork the pieces here, so the king has to move, and it's not looking great for black either. Okay, the Alekhine Gambit. This one is a very provocative opening. So the game starts with d4. And right away, we're trying to attack it with knight f6, hitting the pawn. So they might have this urge to push e5, right? Kicking out the knight. Okay, we can just place it on d5. And they keep chasing the knight. Okay, we just reroute the knight again. Again, provoking this, knight to b6. If they push to d4, okay, d6. We also have this escape for the knight. And then knight f3, bishop to g4, pinning the knight. Bishop to e2, d takes on e5, knight takes. We trade the bishop, right is hanging, so we have to trade. King takes on e2, e6, bishop to e3, f6, knight f3, and knight to c6. Okay, this one is gonna be very similar, but this is from White's perspective, because after we push e4, okay, we have this provoking move, right? It's like the Alekhine Gambit, but we are saying we don't care about the pawn. We're going to gambit it and play knight f3. Okay, they're gonna take the pawn. Now we can push d4, just grabbing more space in the center. d6, something like c4, then g6. Bishop to d3, kicking out the knight. They have to retreat. Knight to c3, bishop to g7, castle, castle, rook to e1. The game goes on, right? So they can develop the other knight. Bishop to g5, h6, and the computer is saying, okay, this game is equal. Even though they have up a pawn, they might have a slight advantage for black with perfect play. Okay, this one gets a little bit weird, especially with top engine moves, but let's just show it. The game starts with an e4 opening, knight f6, the Alekhine Gambit, right? So maybe we can push the pawn here, but instead we choose to defend it, knight c3. Then they can strike with d5. It requires also this cooperation of d5. Here we can either take, but even better is going to be to grab more space with d5. The knight has to move. And then this is the gambit. We're going to push e6. Just like what is happening. Well, as you can see in many openings, this diagonal is weak. It's going to be weak for the king. So it's very convenient for us to double up the pawns for black. Now d4 and then g6, and top edge move. It's not gonna be developing pieces. No, it's going to be grabbing more space with h4, that's why it's kind of crazy. Now bishop to g7, h5. We completely disregard development again. We keep pushing the pawn h5, knight to c6. Now we take the pawn. If they take, we trade rooks. Now we develop the bishop to e3, e5, the takes on e5. Now they're forking the two pieces, and it's fine. We take, and now our bishop is getting into trouble, right? It feels very loose, so we have to do something about it. We trade the knight, and then once they grab the bishop, we trade queens. Okay, this one is very aggressive, but it's still playable for white. Okay, the Cochrane or the Cochrane Gambit, I'm not sure which is the right name, but this is still very interesting. So we start with d4, they play e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes on e5. Okay, this is the Petros defense, and we can enter a lot of theory, right? So here we can, after they push d6, we can come back with the knight, and they take this pawn, and we can take, we can put the queen here, they put the queen here. We enter a lot of boring moves, and this is most likely going to lead to a draw. But there is something, this very weird move, which is we're gonna sacrifice the knight. So again, the f pawn is a target. In many gambits, the f pawn is gonna be a target. So the king takes, accepting this gambit. Now we're gonna grab more space in the center, d4. And we're gambiting a second pawn. But okay, that's not the best move for them. They should develop the bishop. Okay, bishop to e7. Now knight to c3. Rook to e8. Bishop to c4. We can give a check. King to f8. We can castle. And now they're gonna have troubles castling. And we have a slightly better development, right? So we can even launch the other pawn. And all the pieces are in line for an attack. What happens after we take the pawn, they take back with the king, and we hand the e-pawn. Yeah, this is a bit of a trap. So if they take here, we can give a check, right? Geometry of the board. We can give a check on g5. Now, let's say they protect with g6. Okay, we can give a check. Again, geometry. The king has to move, or they can also defend with the bishop, but now this knight is hanging. Okay, so this is just another variation. Now let's check out the Elephant Gambit. This one is very interesting because you get crazy positions really quick. So e4 in d5, knight f3, and this is the case where black pushes d5. So the best way to handle this gambit is actually to accept it. Okay, we're gonna accept the pawn, and if we are unprepared, we might just play something like d3, try to defend the pawn, and let's say we take here, they can trade queens. Now we cannot castle anymore, so black is doing very good. We don't want that to happen, so the best way to deal with this is taking the pawn. We're gonna see also the variation where we take this one. But first we take here, and then can push e4. Okay, strengthening the knight, nothing to worry about. Now we can keep on a pin on the king. They are going to suffer for this, so we can punish this. Now, queen takes, d3, offering the pawn. They cannot take, still the pin. Knight to f6, trying to protect. Knight to d2. Okay, we'll just put more forces into the protection of the pawn. Bishop to f5. So everything revolves around this square. Knight takes on e4. And now we can hit the bishop, right? We go to the side, hitting the bishop. They try to protect with g6, and we strike with g4. Okay, so, and then everything looks like is loose. Everything is hanging here. Like if they move the bishop, we just win material. And they try to do something else. They try to attack the knight with the bishop, right? But they still have to worry about the pin. So it's not looking great for black. So we can just take the bishop here. And if they take, we just take back with the bishop. And my knight is not really hanging because there is the pin. So if they castle, okay, thank you very much. I just take the bishop. This cannot even happen either. So yeah, this is a very interesting opening. So the best way to respond to this gambit, we can just take the pawn. But actually, what if we just take the pawn with the knight? That's also very, very playable. Now the takes on e4, and we develop the bishop. Okay, as we saw before, the queen is going to land on d4. Okay, so we can give a check with the bishop. So now the king has to move. And we strike with f4, right? Just keeping an eye on the knight. So if they take, now we can just reroute and come back, hitting the queen. And we don't really have to worry about this bishop. So if they give a check, now we just move the king. It's perfectly fine. And now it looks like we just hunt the pawn, right? We just hunt one pawn in this like transposition. Nothing to worry about, because now if they take the bishop, the queen is hanging. So the queen is just hanging. We don't really have to worry about that bishop. It's just beautiful geometry of the board. Okay, now the Colorado counter gambit, which is also a really interesting opening. So we started with d4, knight c6, knight f3, and here we have a lot of moves, right? For example, e5. No, we're gonna start with f5, just gambiting the pawn. Okay, if they accept this gambit, this exchange, we can push d5, trying to recover the pawn immediately. And now if they push d4, we just take the pawn. They can trade they can offer trading bishops. We decline that. We can also play bishop to g4, c3, knight f6, castle, e6. So we want to get the bishop out of the way. h3, we have to move the bishop or take, right? So we just take the knight, is fine. Queen takes on f3, bishop to d6, rook to e1, castle, rook takes on e6, knight to e4, h5, queen h5, so the game goes on. There is other interesting variation where back here, okay, we just took the bishop and they do this move. They're gonna try to pin our knight, which is really smart. Now we can push e6 and then knight to e5, so they're targeting our knight twice. We have to do something about it. We protect with the other knight. Okay, and then they put another attacker to this. We cannot really move the knight without losing the queen, so we have to move the queen. Okay, and then once the bishop takes, we take back with our bishop, castle, then castle, and if they take here, we have nothing to worry about, as this pawn is protected twice, and they will have to move the bishop back again. So yeah, this is everything is good with black. As far as the most solid gambits you can play and you can go for, it's going to be the Queen's Gambit decline. Queen's Gambit at the top of the list. Decline or accepted, doesn't really matter. Let's see this variation of d4, d5, c4. Here you're fighting for the center, right? You're fighting for these 4 squares. This one is fighting for this square. But you are not weakening the diagonal of the king. you're still weakening this diagonal, but you have so many defenders. The bishop, knight, queen, maybe a3 is gonna be a defender. So let's say they accept that gambit. D takes on c4. Okay, here we can grab more space. This is completely fine. We're gonna see what happens after this move too. But we can grab more space and play e4. Okay, now they develop the knight. We develop the knights. Everything is fine. e6. We recover our pawn. We have good development. Bishop to d7. Bishop to f4. We have also very good geometry on the board. Bishop to d6. Here we can just retreat. We can trade bishops. Everything is fine. And then castle, castle. Okay, what happens if they play? Let's go back here. We can play to e3. This is fine too. They develop the knight. We recover our pawn. g6, knight f3, knight bishop to g7. They want to fianchetto the bishop. Queen to a4. Okay, we have now given a check. So once they move the bishop, we can put the bishop, the queen on this diagonal, threatening these 2 pawns. Right, they are undefended. So now they will have to do something like castling, and yeah, we can even go for this. Just make sure you don't get trapped. So we can even go back. But yeah, don't trap your queen. It's like Botez Gambit, and yeah, the game goes on. Alright, let's check out. Alright, next up, Alapin counter Gambit. So to know this one, we have to know Queen's Gambit. Queen's Gambit starts with d4, now d5, very common response, and the Queen's Gambit is going to be c4. They're gambiting the pawn, so here we can take Queen's Gambit accepted. But we don't have to do that, we have other options. For example, e6, Queen's Gambit decline. Okay. In this case, we're gonna do something different. After c4, we're gonna play e5, which is really spicy, right? Because they can take here, we're offering the pawn. It's gonna confuse white for a second, at least they will have to think. It's like, wait, what is happening? So one of the common moves is just to take. Okay, they take the pawn. We keep pushing d4. And now, let's say they offer e3, which is also a common move. Okay, they want to develop their bishop, just grabbing more space here in the center. Perfect, we can keep a check with the bishop. Bishop to b4, check. This is forcing, they have to do something about it. Protect with the bishop, protect with the knight. Let's say they protect with the bishop. Now we can take on e3, hanging the bishop. We're gonna completely ignore the threat. We give up the bishop. We don't care. So the point is to give a check here. And if they take... So first, if they take here, they just lose the queen. Right? That's amazing. And okay, let's see they see through this threat. And they put the king on e2. They ignore this. It's okay. Now we can do this very nasty promotion. So here we can promote not to a queen. Or to a rook. No. We're gonna promote to a knight. Because this is forcing. They have to take. Right? They have to take. Okay. They're gonna have to take with the rook. Perfect. And now we have this available check. With the other bishop. Bishop to g4. And now this is forcing. They will have to move the king somewhere. And then they don't have to move here, right? Sorry. They don't have to move here to f6. They can move here. But this will be even worse for white. So one of the best moves is going to be to move to f2. And we're winning the queen anyway. Okay, so I'm going to show you another variation for the fun of it. So let's say they take the pawn here. We push the d4 pawn. And they don't really offer e3. They don't have to do it. So they're going to put the knight here. It's a very good idea to target the knight. So now we develop the knight to c6, protecting the pawn, so they cannot take anymore. And they want to fianchetto the bishop. G3 to fianchetto the bishop later. Now we can develop the knight. Bishop to g2, knight to g6, and we're about to recover the pawn. say they develop the other bishop, queen d7, they castle, and now we have different ideas, kicking out the bishop. We can also take this pawn. So everything is good in this position. We don't really have to worry about it. Like, wait, we gambited the pawn. Are we lost on material? Are we lost on time? No, we are just about to recover the pawn, and life is good for black. All right, let's move on to the Benko / Volga Gambit. The game starts with d4. We develop the knight to f6, and here they might want to push c4. Yeah, very common opening idea, almost like the Queen's Gambit, where you push these two pawns from the start. Now we can go with c5. First, we're gonna offer in the pawn. If they take, we're happy because they have double the pawns, and we might have more control in the center. So it actually makes more sense to grab a space and play d5. We're gonna undermine this pawn structure by playing b5. That is the gambit. Okay, and then let's say they take the pawn, and we are gonna offer a second pawn, a6, in exchange for development, right? So once they take the pawn, we don't even have to rush. We can develop the bishop by preparing, we're preparing to develop the bishop by playing g6. So knight c3. Now we can take the bishop. It's fine. We can take with the bishop, and if they grab here more space by pushing e4, then we can just trade bishops. We want them to avoid any castling. We don't want them to castle safe, so we're gonna trade the bishops. So d6, and the game goes on. For example, we can have knight moves like knight f3. We are gonna French cheat of the bishop, and then castle g3, castle g2, knight to b7, and then they have to waste another move to get the rook into the game. Rook e1, knight to g4, queen e2, knight to g5. So knight d8, knight b6. Let's say they start with this launch of f4, knight to e7, a4, rook a7, a5, and here we don't even have to rush or anything. We can go queen a8. If they take, we just take here, and yeah, this is like very bad for white. So, but yeah, the gambit starts with this. Let me show you another variation. Okay, we have reached this point where we offer the pawn, right? We offer b5. Then they take, and we offer the second pawn on a6. They don't have to take. An important variation will be e3. So what happens if they play e3, trying to cover these two squares? Okay, so we can take the pawn. Once they take, we give a check with the queen. Queen a5. Alright, so the only way to defend this bishop is going to be developing the knight. Knight c3. And now we can start developing the other bishop, aiming for this pawn, right? Okay, they develop the other knight. We can win the pawn. This cannot happen because there is a pin. So, and this cannot happen either, right? We just take with the bishop. So once they castle, we move the knight out of the way because now this can happen. The knight has disappeared. So we have to move the knight out of the way, kicking out the bishop. Or they can also play this move a4. So we take the bishop, they take the knight, and now we play something like e6, having some scope for our bishop, knight to g3, and the game goes on. So, but yeah, this is an excellent variation of the Benko Gambit. Okay, if you like the previous gambit, probably you will like this one. We start the game with d4, d5, and then we're gonna offer e4. So here, this is a bit dubious, right? We're gonna offer the pawn, but it's completely fine. So they take here. We want to recover the pawn, so we play knight c3, and they wanna do the same thing. Okay, they're gonna protect the pawn. Perfect. What we're going to do is don't try to recover the pawn. We're going to offer a second one. So f3. We're gonna offer f3 in exchange of rapid development. So they will take the pawn, we take with the knight. Knight takes on f3. We're better in development. Everything is good. Now the game can continue with bishop to f5. Okay, we want to trade bishops. We don't want them to get ahead of development. So we take back with the queen. c6. Bishop to f4. And then let's say they play e6. Castles. Bishop to e7. Rook to h1. And castle. Okay, and now we have different ideas. For example, putting the knight here on this outpost, knight to e5, and we can start launching the pawns. So very solid opening. Let's see other variation. All right, we have reached this point where we're gonna offer the second pawn. They take, and other very interesting move is, why don't we take with the queen? What happens? Because we're hanging the queen, the pawn, right? So the queen takes this pawn on d4, and now we can develop the bishop with tempo. Bishop to a3. So queen goes to b4. Very good move. They're targeting this pawn. Okay, now we can castle. And then it's like, wait, what is happening? They can develop the bishop. They're targeting these two pieces. Do we just move the queen somewhere? I mean, we can maybe play this. No, we're gonna do something else. We're gonna play knight to b5. The knight is protected. We can move it. No worry. And it's like, wait, are we hanging the queen just like that? We're just hanging the queen. This is the trap. We can just play knight to c7. Checkmate. Yeah, the king doesn't have any moves. So this was the trap of the BlackMar-Diemer. Okay, now we have reached this point where we're jumping in with the knight, threatening to give a checkmate, and they ignore this. They're smart, so they actually protect the pawn. How do we continue this game? We can take, we go with this idea of taking the pawn on b7. The rook is hanging. Okay, only way to defend this diagonal is queen to e4. Okay, we're keeping an eye on the rook. Queen is defended, so we can take the knight. The knight is hanging. Perfect. Also, that hangs the bishop, so it gets bonkers. It gets really crazy. I have to move the king. And now look at, also this is hanging. So, but they're also smart because this pawn was hanging. The knight was threatening to go here. Okay, so we can threaten to take the rook. We hand the rook, but we take the rook here. We check, and then the game continues. The game goes crazy. This knight is hanging, so we have to retreat it. Knight to c3, and they have to move the bishop. So the game goes on here, but yeah, I think we are slightly better just because these pieces are easier to develop, right? The bishop can come in. The bishop has to be moved, so we might have this tempo to move the other knight, and the bishop is trapped, and we're still keeping an eye on this file. So slightly better for white. The Englund Gambit. This is a very sneaky opening where we're gonna offer a pawn and then a queen early start. So d4, and we start with e5 right away. We offer the pawn, and then we threaten to recover the pawn by developing the knight to c6. Okay, easy move for white. Knight to f3, queen e7. So queen e7, we're aiming at this diagonal, right? So this is the purpose of this gambit. Now f4 and queen to b4. Okay, so bishop is hanging. They will have to retreat. Okay, now the pawn is hanging. Queen takes on b2. Bishop goes to c3, keeping an eye on this diagonal, so the rook is no longer hanging. All right, they cannot move now after we develop the bishop. We develop the bishop to b4. They cannot take because they lost the king. So queen to d2. Okay, we can take the bishop. And if they take the bishop with the queen, this is checkmate. Yeah, very sneaky. There is other traps. Let me show you. Okay, so this is one of the sneakiest variations. We have given up the pawn. They take here. And we develop the bishop, not the knight. Bishop to c5. Knight to f3. They still protect the pawn. It still makes sense. Now d6. We're gonna offer this pawn. Okay, once they take here, we're gonna offer the knight. Yeah, this is just nasty. This is nastiness. So it's like, wait a second, why are they offering the knight? If you're black, if you're white, don't take the knight. But if they take, now you're happy because you're targeting the f pawn, right? There are many traps with this really weak pawn. The f pawn, they have to take back with the king, and now the queen is hanging. Okay, this is a beautiful queen trap. So we're gonna play a very interesting gambit where we're gonna push the pawn d4, d5, c3, and now e6, queen b3, knight to f6, queen takes on b7. This is the Botez Gambit, right? Actually, don't play this. This is terrible. So this is just like a joke, because yeah, there's the Botez Gambit. They are sisters who are known by hanging their queens in different moves. So I think it can work in different stages of the game, especially at the end game. Maybe I can show you some games where I held my queen and the opponent didn't realize it and I take their queen. But no, not like this, not at the beginning. So this is just for fun. We have the Goring Gambit. This is for Caro-Kann players. So the game starts with d4 and c6, the Caro-Kann. Now d4 and d5. It's perfectly normal theory. They take the pawn. And instead of taking, which is the most common response to this, is we're going to ignore this and develop the knight. Knight to f6. So we are giving up the pawn in exchange for development, and especially you're going to see it now. We're going to rob white from castling rights. So knight f3, and then we can strike with d5. If they take the pawn, then we are going to take the queen. And we're even threatening here to fork the queen and the rook and the king, rook e1. So now, what happens if, let's go a little backwards, they don't play knight f3. Instead, they put the bishop here on, so not c4. They put the bishop here on b5, right? Keeping the pin. Maybe they want to have this idea of pushing d5. So now we prevent this by playing queen d5. So if bishop takes, we take back, and we're still doing fine. We have the bishop pair, knight f3, bishop g4, and let's say the castle. We can even have this move, right? If they take back with the queen, then we'll have double the pawns, and we have a game. So yeah, this is a very solid option for Caro-Kann players. Okay, so an interesting response. What if they play c3? We still go with this idea of e5. So we can even play knight f3. They can play knight f3, and now we can grab more space in the center, e4. So here you have to fill in the blanks, but this is a similar idea, e5, and the knights are out. Probably one of the wildest, the Budapest Gambit. So the game starts with d4, and we develop the knight to f6. c4. Here we have a lot of different options. We can play d5, d6, for example, then even fetch the bishop. We can play many different moves, but we're going to gambit the pawn on e5. Okay, so very similar to the Englund Gambit. So here we're gonna hand the pawn, and we move the knight. Okay, we want to kind of threaten to recover, so they develop the knight. Knight to f3, perfect. Knight to c6, bishop to f4, and then we can give a check with the bishop to b4. Okay, this is where it gets wild. So if they develop the knight to d2, queen e7, and we have this alignment of the pieces, right? And we have 3 pieces threatening to take this pawn. a3, knight takes on e5, and they can take here, it's perfectly fine. But let's say they actually take the bishop. That is a blunder, that actually blunders the game. Because of this alignment of the pieces, we can play knight to d3. Knight to d3, and the king has no moves. There is a pin on this pawn, so this is checkmate. Alright, we just saw this variation where they take the pawn. What if they push to d5, which is also excellent, it makes sense. Now we can put the bishop on c5, and we're threatening to take this pawn. So if they move the bishop to g5, this is a blunder. They just blunders the bishop. Now we can give a check here. And if they take, this one comes with tempo. This is another check. They have to retreat. And the bishop is hanging. So this is another crazy variation where, okay, they just took our pawn. Give me a second. I'm just going to go back here. So they take the pawn. Now we move the knight. And let's say they play queen d4. Okay, looking at the knight, we have to protect it. Well, we can play d6. d6, the bishop protects the knight. Everything is fine. But we're blundering another pawn. We're giving, not blundering, but we're giving them another pawn. Okay, we can kick out the queen by developing the other knight, knight to c6. So if they give a check, we can develop the other bishop. This one comes with tempo. And let's say they take here the pawn, right? So we can even sacrifice the queen. We can go with this nasty move, sacrificing the queen, because now once they take, we're threatening to fork everything. So here we take back the queen, and just look at black's position. We have better development. These pawns are not really any concern, and white still has to think about development. So we're better in this position with black.
Have no regrets, yeah, I'll tie up my chest. I'll never forget what it's like to be in debt. Been stabbed in the back bed, I'll show you what happens. Pass me the mic and I'll show you with action. I feel.
Let's see the Marshall Gambit. So this is what it looks like. Let me go back here. d4, d5, c4. This is more like a Queen's Gambit decline. This is going to be like a Queen's Gambit decline structure. Knight to c3. c6, e4. So this is going to transpose into the Marshall Gambit. So just by logic, right? If they take here, we just take back with the bishop. They will have to take this pawn. What is more important, the central pawn, these two, or the c pawn? Yeah, probably the central pawn. Okay, we can recover back immediately with the knight. Knight takes on e4, but we allow this to happen. They're gonna give a check. Okay, we just develop and protect with the bishop. Queen takes on d4, so this pawn was hanging, and then we can take the bishop. Okay, but we're giving up the knight. So this is scary, and yet we still have these two lines of attack. So this is perfectly fine. We have to develop the bishop, and it looks like this pawn is hanging. It's not hanging because there is some traps here. So here we can just simply play bishop to f3, and now they're gonna have to move the queen. But there is also this cheeky variation where we can put the queen on d6. We're threatening to checkmate. So let's say they take the rook. Yeah, this fool just hung the rook. Well, not really. This leads to a checkmate. So queen gives a check on f8. The king has to move. Castle, and this castle comes with tempo. Now king to c7 and queen d8, checkmate, right? So they cannot play that. Let's go back here, bishop to e2. Now knight to a6, top engine move. Bishop to a5, we just have to get the bishop out of the way. b6, queen d6, with the idea of aligning the rook into this line, into this file. And now f6, f3, kicking out the queen, queen to e5, and now this pawn is hanging. We can take with tempo. Once the king moves, we take the rook. And yeah, this is still very playable. It's very good for white. Okay, this one was new for me, the Blumenfeld Gambit. So the game starts with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, much like a modern defense structure, knight to f3, c5, okay, now d5, and b5. So we're gambiting the pawn, right? We're gambiting the pawn, and now the game continues. So they can always take. A slightly better move will be to take here on e6. So we just take back, and they accept our gambit. They accept our pawn, and now we're happy because we are gonna push the pawn, and we have a lot more control over these squares. And this pawn is not doing really much on this b5 square. Okay, so the game goes on. For example, e3. Now bishop to d6, knight to c3. We kind of finish development. Bishop to e2, castle, castle, knight b7, b3, queen e7, bishop to b2, rook to d8, queen c2, e5. Okay, there can be other moves. For example, let's go back here, d5. And they can always put the bishop here, pinning the knight on g5. Okay, so now we can develop the bishop to e7, e3, castle, bishop to e2, bishop to b7, knight to c3, bishop to b7. As you can see, this is a very solid opening. And you don't really have to worry about any pawn pushes, maybe except for this pawn. But yeah, they have no control over the center with the pawns. So I actually like this variation of this opening. Now other move instead of g5 can be knight to c3. Okay, now we can push d4 and knight to a4, queen a5, and now we're recovering the pawn immediately after this check, and we're just taking the pawn. So everything is good with this opening, very solid.
I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna.
Alright, this one is offbeat like most gambits, but this one is going to be with the dodge defense. So d4, and the dodge defense starts by pushing the f pawn, right, weakening this diagonal. Okay, it's still fine, playable. We play queen d3. Now we're gonna get d5, and we gambit the pawn. We gambit the g4 pawn in exchange for activity and development of the bishop. So we're gonna gambit the pawn, and then the second pawn on h3. Okay, so they can push here, it's fine, we can just take. They develop the knight, bishop to g2, e6, knight to c3. The game continues, and we have a lot of pressure on this pawn. We can develop the bishop, and then we can castle. Everything is fine. Alright, so here we have just offered the pawn. They take, and we offer a second pawn. They can push to g3, or they can also choose to take. It's fine, we don't even need to rush this. We can develop the other bishop first. So once we develop the bishop, there is no way they can really defend this pawn. So it's been attacked 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So everything is fine. You don't need to worry about it. Now knight to f6, knight to c3, knight to c6. Now you can take, bishop takes on h3. And once you trade bishops, you have a slight edge because you have developed 4 pieces and black has only developed 2. So e6, knight to g5, you can jump in with the knight and target the pawn, this pawn on h7. And yeah, you have good development. Let's say they move something like this. You can even give, well, it's not a check, but alright, if you're wondering what happens if I take the pawn immediately, yeah, it's also completely fine, right? So you can take the pawn with the bishop. Once they trade, you develop the knight. They will develop the other knight, knight f6, knight to g5. You can even threaten again this pawn, right? So you're attacking it 3 times. They develop the other knight, knight c3, queen d7. Now you can take the pawn. If they take with the rook, now you just take. They take. You can even give a check and then win the knight. Okay, so everything is fine, and you just continue the game. But here you're forking these 2 pieces. The queen has to move. So yeah, this is very kind of upbeat, but it's a solid opening as well.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
Bronze Gambit. So for any beginner, I wouldn't recommend to start with this pawn push, f4, right? But maybe more advanced players can do it. f4 because it's weakening this diagonal. Okay, so we can strike with d5, and now this is a possible move now. Then let's say that they take the pawn, d6. We're offering a second pawn to activate the bishop. So this is interesting. Well, if they develop the knight to c3, then we can give a check to h4, and now they have to move the pawn. Only defensive move. We can keep up the bishop, and once they take, yeah, this is checkmate. We don't even have to take the rook here. This is checkmate. There is other variation where I'm gonna go back here, bishop to d6. Instead of this, instead of taking back with the bishop, we're going to ignore it and develop the bishop to f5. Okay, so we're giving up this pawn. They take here. So okay, now we're aiming for this queen trap. Let's say they make other move, that is, so they will have to play maybe something like knight c3. That's fine. But if they make any other move, let's say this, then so the queen gets trapped, right? They have no moves. They will have to take, and then we take back, and the queen is trapped.
Is many, but got hard. I'm ready to change scars to envy, to win large and plenty. I like to play fast, never change back. Calling out, I'll pay back, cause I'm great at that. Oh.
We're moving on to the Sturm Gambit, and this one we start with the birds opening f4. After we get something like d5, then we gambit the pawn on c4. So we have these two pawns out, and here black has different responses. The best move for us is going to be if they take this pawn. That now we can develop, we have different moves. We can develop the knight. We can also push e3, trying to recover the pawn. And for example, let's say they try to protect the pawn here. We even have this provoking move, queen f3, for example, looking at the rook. Black is fine, by the way. They can do this, but now we can challenge the pawn structure. And okay, it gets good. But the other response for black is actually engine move. Top engine move is d4, ignoring the pawn. d4 is better. Now it's annoying, a little bit annoying for us. We cannot develop the knight, so later we'll have to develop the knight to a3, which is like really sad, but okay. Knight f3, knight c6, d3, knight f6. The game goes on, but okay, it's still a good opening. The Swiss Gambit. It also starts with the birds opening f4, and if we get something symmetrical like f5, we strike with e4, gambiting the pawn. So best move in the position is to take, and here we can develop the knight, but we have something even better, which is d3. Given the second pawn, here we just recover, and now the game goes on. Knight f6, knight f3, and both sides have weakened this diagonal, right? The f pawn diagonal. Knight to c6, knight to g5, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, castle, and the game continues. But it gets really interesting after this. Now the Williams Gambit. I'm not gonna lie, this is very dubious. So we start with the birds opening, the last one I think, then d5, and then we strike with d4, just hanging the pawn. So once they take, the idea is to play bishop to c4, a rapid development, a quick development of the bishop, but this is not the move that the engine is going to recommend. Instead, the engine recommends something like d3. So after d3, bishop to f5, we push g4, e5, and we have double the pawns here, so it's fine. I think it's completely fine. Bishop to d7, we take the pawn, and yeah, the game goes on. So I would actually play this line instead of just pushing the developing the bishop instead, because there is ways to punish this. So for example, knight to c6. Yeah, they can just focus on development and they can punish this extra pawn. The Tenisson Gambit. So in this one, we're gonna sacrifice a pawn. We can start the game with knight f3, and if they push d5, okay, we sacrifice the e4 pawn. Once they take, we move the knight to g5, right? We're gonna go for this attack. If they push the pawn, which is like perfectly normal, then we just recover our pawn. Knight takes on e4, and they keep putting pressure on the pawn. We can move to g3. Okay, we just retreat and move. Then f4. Okay, here we don't really have to worry or move the knight. We can give a check with the queen h5, geometry of the board. Then g6. If g6 happens, that will be a terrible mistake because we can just take here the queen with tempo once the queen moves. Well, here we can offer a threat of queens, right? So it's fine. But if they do anything else, if they do something like here, the rook is hanging. So they have to block with the queen. This is forcing the best move. Now once the bishop takes, now we move the knight. Okay, here we have a quick attack. Okay, so the other version of this Tenisson Gambit is we can jump in with to g5, or it can also go to e5. If they try to push here the pawn to kick away the knight, again, we don't really have to move the knight. We can give a check with the queen. And if they try to block it with the pawn, this is one of the most common tactical patterns in chess, isn't it? So once they take, we just take the rook on h8. And yeah, this is winning for black. What happens if they don't push the pawn? Well, the game continues, right? They can just play this, or they can even put pressure on the knight. Okay, we can just go back. So everything is fine for white so far. Okay, the Paris Gambit. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the weirdest gambits I have seen, and probably not even that solid. But let's play, it's still fun. So knight to h3. Right out of the gate, super weird. Now d5, okay, g3, and we're going to gambit the pawns on this side of the board. So e5, f4, we're just gonna give out the pawn. And first they can trade and take the bishop, trade the bishop and take the knight, because now this pawn is going to be unprotected. So they take here, and this is a second gambit, right? We're gonna gambit a pawn. We're saying, okay, let's just play d4, and not really care about anything. So if they take here, the game continues and it gets really crazy. Before that, the engine line, so after d4, after this happens, we can castle. We can castle, and actually is a little bit better because if they take here, we just take back, knight f6, we can play d4, then bishop goes to e7, develop the other knight, castle, bishop to f4, okay, kind of normal looking moves. Knight to d3, queen d3, okay. But if we decide to ignore this and play d4 right away, then they can take our pawn. That's the first step in the wrong direction for white, right? Now we can take back, bishop d6, we castle. Yeah, we castle and we ignore this. We have no pawns in front of the king. That is what it gets me so nervous. Then e4, queen to h4, and we're saying, okay, the bishop is hanging, we don't even care. I guess we can also force the threat of pieces here. Not something like, no, sorry, here. Wait, we don't even have a move that forces the threat of pieces. Right, we can play, I guess, queen g4, and it will be forcing for black to move somewhere. Okay, I was thinking about that. So after we put the queen of f3, we're gonna hand the bishop because we're targeting the king now. And after a few moves, we have kind of an equal position, but it's still very shaky. King d8, we can give a check with the queen. King goes to d7, the other rook comes in. So here we're gonna try to win the rook, okay? So we're gonna get some counterplay in exchange for the 3 pawns we just gave up. Next one we have Dada Gambit. I hope I pronounced this one correctly. So the game starts with g3. And black should really take a space in the center. So they can play e5. We can be a fianchetto the bishop to g2. And they take even more space in the center. Black is happy. But we are going to gambit the pawn, the b4 pawn. Okay. Just take, black takes. And then the trick here is c4, right? We're really hoping they take here, because now we're tricking black. Geometry of the board here, we're giving a check. If they defend with the knight, we just take the knight, and the bishop is hanging. And the next, oh well, they can defend also with the bishop. Here the bishop is directly hanging, so black actually has to ignore this, and they can just develop the knight, and then we can take the pawn. The game goes on, right? So we can even target here the knight twice. They can defend with the bishop. We can target the other bishop. So yeah, the game goes on from here. We can even take this pawn that is hanging. But okay, so we're really hoping to get this pawn hanging, and if they accept the second pawn, then we have tricked them. We win a full piece.
Loose, grab juice, get goose, tattoos, taboos, get screwed. Loosen up, buttercup, all those hate comments will never make you feel enough. We're all adequate.